Now here in the studio with me I have Dr. Shane Kelly, and the report that you co-authored, I summed up as saying that the latest State of the Environment report from the Hauraki Gulf Forum concludes that most environment indicators either show negative trends or remain at alarming levels. There's been a collective failure to halt or reverse the decline in the Gulf's natural resources, writes the Forum's chairman. The report makes for challenging reading and calls into question some of the fundamental assumptions we use when undertaking business as usual, it says. Shane, explain to me where you are, how you fit into the preparation of this report.
So the reports are produced every 3 years, and in this period, I was hired as the lead author on the report. So my role was mainly related to looking at environmental indicators that were used.
All right, now I understand this is actually the third issue in a series of reports that is put out every 3 years. So when you're talking about indicators, etc., is it an ongoing monitoring process that you're carrying out yourself, or who's doing the monitoring?
So this time we did things a little bit differently. We tried to provide a real historical context for where the Gulf is at, and so we looked back at what's happened right from really the arrival of humans and you know, particularly over the last 150 years, what sort of impacts we've had on the Gulf. And then we also added in sort of more recent, more intensive monitoring data as well, and that was provided from fisheries, from regional councils, from a whole series of different sources. We sourced data for that.
Now tell me, I was reading the previous reports as well, and certainly the first one said that there's limited information available, and there's a lot of black holes, and it was really part of an exercise to monitor this the state of the Gulf at longer term. So now, 2 reports on, is the picture improving?
In terms of the health of the Gulf, what we found was that humans have had quite a profound impact on the Gulf. We've lost major areas of habitat. We've reduced the biomass of some of our most important fishery species down to quite ecologically low levels anyway, and also things like contaminants are continuing to accumulate in our urban estuaries, and other things like sedimentation is also fairly widespread around the Gulf.
Now, can you make this concrete for our listeners? Because I mean, we're familiar with the fact that environment indicators right around the globe have been always at worrying trends. What does that mean for us here living on Great Bear Island?
In terms of out here on the island, you're probably a bit isolated from a lot of the impacts of the Gulf, but probably the main one in terms of the island here is fishing. So the state of the fisheries is really one of the key things, and a couple of the indicators that we looked at, for instance, one was snapper. If you look at where we are today compared to what the unfished stock looked like, in 1995 we got down to around 10% of the virgin biomass, but the catch levels have been set that allow the stock to rebuild, and so by 2020 the predictions are that we'll be up around 40% of the biomass for snapper. But if we, and it's snappers are managed to produce the biomass that'll produce the maximum sustainable yield. So if we do that, fisheries will be held at around 20% of the original biomass, which means around 80% of the snapper biomass is missing from the system.
And what does that mean in terms of the system as a whole?
Well, snapper are one of those species that have a really quite a key role within the ecosystem. And for instance, one of the roles that they have seems to be in maintaining urchin barrens on reef systems. So what they do is they feed on kinna. The kinna graze down the algae, and if you take snapper out of the system, you get population blooms of the kinna, which actually mow down the main algal species on the reef. So what we're seeing is lots more bare areas of reef where you get low numbers of snapper, and also crayfish do sort of play a similar role.
But people are going to ask, so what's the problem with that?
Well, I suppose from a human perspective, there might be no problem. But if you're, if you're a species that's living on the reefs, then there's major problems. One of the key things I think is that humans can adapt and to changing environment, whereas the species that are actually living in the Gulf, they don't adapt. They either are lost, or their capacity to move to somewhere else is negligible.
Now, in your report, you also make reference to a lot of contaminants coming in, sedimentation, exotic species invading. Now, with that, and of course the ongoing human impacts, let alone the change in global temperatures that's being talked about, change in currents. Now, that sounds to me like a system that's under a lot of, it's a bit of a washing machine. How does that the changes you're talking about, for example, the reduction in snapper population and changes in alga growth, affect the system's ability to cope with all these changes?
Well, I think that's one of the key things. If you put a system under stress through contamination, through sedimentation, through the loss of key species or potential reduction in key species, then you reduce the resilience of that system to actually be able to cope with any new stresses and natural stresses that come along. And we've seen some of those, what those natural stresses can look like. For instance, in the 1990s, there was a major die-off of pilchards that not only affected the Hauraki Gulf, but spread right from Australia through to New Zealand. Now, that was pilchards. If that happened, for instance, with a snapper population that was already 80% of the biomass is already removed. If you had that was, in that case, it was a virus that struck it. How would snapper populations respond to that? Would they be able to recover?
Now, the Hauraki Gulf is a system that's a gulf, it's open to the sea and the rest of the coast. I know that overseas there has been ecosystems and lakes, etc., that have kind of reached a tipping point, and because they're closed, they've been pushed over the edge, so to speak. The RLC in Asia is perhaps one of the best known cases that's really gone over the edge. Is there any risk of the Hauraki Gulf or aspects of the Hauraki Gulf reaching a tipping point where there's change that will occur from which there is no return?
Well, we hope not, and I think that one of the good news things is actually we're aware of the issues that are facing the Gulf, and we're in a position where we actually can respond and actually try and correct some of these things. So I don't think that we're at a tipping point yet, but if we keep going in the same direction, who knows where we're going to end up? And so what we've got is a timely sort of wake-up call to allow us to respond to the direction that the Gulf's heading in.
Now, the information you're talking about that you're using for that, there have been, I guess, the quota management system, one that's had a lot of criticism by other parties, particularly recreational fishers, who say the information that's being used to manage it is actually not as reliable as is made to look by the fisheries scientists. In other words, that the predicted maximum sustainable yield, the quota recovery, etc., is based on assumptions which might be valid assumptions from a fisheries manager's point of view, but not so valid from ecologist or recreational fisher's point of view. How do you feel about the quality of the data that's being used to say, yes, the state of the fisheries and the state of the Gulf is acceptable?
I think that for some species we actually have good data or reasonably good data on actually population sizes. For other species, things like Teraki, for instance, we don't have such good data. So it varies from species to species. What we also don't have good data is actually on how species interact with each other or how they interact with other parts of the environment. And so in terms of ecosystem management, we're really not well advanced in terms of the science.
I've got here it's actually the presentation of the second report, which is dated March 2008, so that's the previous report here. And it says in there, I've only got the minutes, actually, I haven't got the report, but it makes reference to the report as containing basically a lot of black holes. Not so much the report itself, but the quality and the breadth of the knowledge that's available for a system as big and complex as the Hauraki Gulf. Now, critics would say, okay, well, you don't actually know enough to actually do realistic management here, or even justify our attempt to manage. How do you feel about that criticism, and do you think we have enough levers to understand and manage the ecosystem in the Gulf with?
I think that, you can, as a scientist, you can always collect more data and get better information. But we do know a lot about the Gulf and how it functions, and actually and the ecosystems and the stresses, and we understand in many respects where we are in terms of historic conditions compared to us today. So we can make management decisions that can improve the outcomes for the Gulf. So in terms of, as I said, you can always get more information, but the perceived lack of information shouldn't be a reason why you don't actually make that management decisions actually will help improve the Gulf.
I'm talking to Dr. Shane Kelly here, who's one of the co-authors of the report State of the Gulf, which is a report on the state of the environment prepared by the Hauke Gulf Forum. If you want to know more about the report, then in less than 2 hours at 3 o'clock, there's going to be a presentation down at the Claris Health Centre by Dr. Kelly and his colleagues here that will allow you to ask a few more questions. I'm going to have a break now before I talk to my next interviewee, which will be Tim Hyam. He's the Hauke Gulf Forum manager, and he'll tell us a little bit more about the reason and the purpose of this report and the work of the forum. Thank you, Dr. Kelly.